Prime Minister, tell me, what do you think of this expo that's going on here right now?
Well, I think it was a very good idea from the Ministry of Health and its partners to use the occasion of the 30th Inter-Sessional meeting to organize a health fair. We have to begin to sell the message of wellness, of good health habits everywhere, and this conference provides a unique opportunity for that message to go out again. I want to commend all the leaders in the respective booths. I've noticed there's an emphasis on non-communicable diseases, which are major challenges for our healthcare program. I've noted that, for example, we also have a booth which should have provided information with respect to our program for national health insurance. This would be a major revolution to healthcare in that it will bring the issue of affordability and access into better reach of our people once we launch this national health insurance program. Generally, I commend the efforts. We have participation from Nevis, and in fact we have an interest here in ensuring that on both islands, St. Kitts and Nevis, a studied attention is being paid by everyone to improving his or her health.
Great. Now, this expo forms part of, as I mentioned before, the Inter-Sessional meeting of the CARICOM heads. Can you give us any sort of insight as to how the meetings have been going so far?
So far, the meetings have been very productive, challenging at times because some of the issues are weighty and controversial, but nonetheless the spirit of unity has pervaded throughout all of the meetings, and we have been able to reconcile what at first blush appeared to be differing position to come up with a consensus on a number of matters of importance to the people of the region.
Okay, great. Let me jump over to Minister Liebert for a moment. Minister Liebert, do you have any input as to the significance of the CARICOM Heads Conference and/or the expo that's going on here today?
Well, in terms of transportation, that is an item it's on the agenda that will be discussed. Transportation between the islands, because you have to maintain that nexus, that link in terms of travel and in terms of other services. For example, the movement of cargo through the islands, that's the difficulty. You will recognize that the vessels that transport the cargo between the islands are foreign vessels. For example, for us to ship down south to Trinidad, for example, we'll have to ship via tropical or some other line to Miami and down south. So these are issues, they are very weighty issues as it relates to air transportation. And transportation is derived demand. If there's no demand for us to get import cargo here in St. Kitts, then the vessels won't come. But we want to see those vessels interregional vessels, and to see how best we can improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of the movements of people and our cargo throughout the islands, to create and maintain that link and bond between the CARICOM islands or countries.
You touched on my next question, so I was wondering if you could speak a bit more as to what are your thoughts towards the development of the inter-regional ferry system. It's been discussed before, but do you think that the region is in a position to fully push that notion forward?
Well, it's been discussed for a long time, right? And as I said to you, it's a derived demand, and one has to study the data and study it carefully, because in terms of moving from island to island, it has to be not just political decisions, it has to be an economic decision as well. So you have to put the economics into it, the cost to move from point and a point of origin to a destination point, the cost of fuel, the cost of the vessels themselves, the equipment to move the cargo and move people, and it has to be a decision that is economically feasible and sustainable.
Okay. Let me go back to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, one of the booths here at the Expo focuses on the findings of the Marijuana Commission. And I know you made numerous announcements in Parliament about the unanimous agreements that will be addressed by Cabinet going forward. I mean, can you give us an idea? What's the next step? I mean, what's going to happen now?
There are two major initiatives that will follow. Well, three. One, there has to be a legislative response to address the concerns raised by the Commission on the matter of decriminalization of the use for limited quantities of marijuana. So we'll have to have a legislative response to that. We will have to have a legislative response that would set out the framework for the use of marijuana for medical purposes. So there's an absence now of a legal frame since it is prohibited. And so pieces of legislation will address those two matters. Equally, legislation would be required as we move forward to deal with any ancillary matters related to the use and trade in this particular product. The second broad category, in my view, is the matter of the massive public education which the commissioners recommended that the country engage in prior to any movement with respect to their recommendation. And we have asked the commissioners to consider an ongoing role in that regard, having regard to their extensive knowledge which they would have developed in the course of their discussions and outreach on this matter. It is our expectation from the government point of view that within the next 2 months the legislation would be there. The public education will be an ongoing program, and the time frame for that will have to be articulated by the commissioners. That is going to involve educators, health workers, everybody in that particular discussion. So in the first half of the year, legislation would be had that would deal with the legal issues related to the decriminalization of marijuana use, its use as specifically recommended for medicinal purposes. And the third area, we would want to set up a special committee that will focus on all issues now related to the medicinal use. How do we go about developing an industry? What we would need, for example, in terms of quantity of land? What are the potential markets, if any? What resources, land, people, money we will need to do the mobilization of this particular effort? And I believe that that committee, while it could draw upon membership from the National Core Committee that delivered the report, will require some new skill sets, business people, scientists and other persons to be galvanized to help us walk the journey to where we must go.
Now, as you mentioned, there are a lot of plans to push the development of the medicinal use of marijuana, but we have quite a significant Rastafarian community here in St. Kitts Nevis, and marijuana is an integral part of their religious practices. So is there going to be much effort put towards possible decriminalization for religious use or maybe even recreational uses in small amounts?
Well, certainly the commissioners said that we must move in a phased basis. What they settle on is that there is an abundance of empirical evidence as to the net benefit of marijuana for medicinal purposes. So that is now settled, and that will be the first part. We will then move to the other areas. There are two other broad areas: religious purposes, and we are sensitive to that. Indeed, there is now a case before the High Court where that matter of marijuana being used for religious purposes will perhaps be opined upon by the court, and that will provide further guidance on that matter. We are a law-abiding society, and once the High Court articulates what is the law with respect to that matter, that will then provide another basis from which the government would act. And then there is the issue of recreational use. And while the commissioners did not explicitly recommend that particular approach, we could deduce from the recommendation that persons be allowed 5 plants, for example, and a certain minimum quantity being treated as ticketable offense, that inherent in that concession is some room for persons to use this in certain ways without being criminalized. In other words, you get a ticket, there's no criminal record attached to that quantity, limited quantity. Of course, above that, it then becomes the normal provisions of the law will take place. And also, there is the recommendation that its use will be done in private, that is in public spaces, of course, that we outlaw the use of marijuana. And even before we get to marijuana, we would appreciate that even with respect to tobacco generally, the world movement had been to constrain the use of tobacco in public places. That has been the result of science that reflect that secondhand smoking was very dangerous to persons, and in fact had impacted some persons in more adverse ways than if they were in fact the one who was doing the smoking. So I think that particular recommendation is consistent with the trust that you have defined areas for people who want to smoke to do so. And we have outlawed, for example, smoking not allowed at government headquarters, smoking not allowed in any government buildings now. And we would want that pattern to be continued.